Obviously, we have to wait for the rise of a neighboring civilization. Here, as we can see from the Parthenon statues, it's the human body really looked at that's the center of the artist's interest. Greek writers tell us their wall painting was equally good, unstinting in their praise for its skill and realism. But walls get destroyed, and now the only Greek painting left is on vases. This is a masterpiece, painted and potted by a man called Exikias. At first sight, you might think the figures look disappointingly flat. But look closer, and you're drawn into an intense human struggle. You can see what the main story is, a man-woman conflict. But for the Greeks, it was much more than that. This is the story of the famous Achilles, the greatest of the heroes, a killing machine. And the woman is Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, that Greek horror story of the race of fighting women, aggressive women. And what is she? A vulnerable young girl. They're so different. The man is a great black menace. He even looks masked. We see that he's a man, but we can't see his face. And the woman is all white and soft. We see her face all right, with its clear skin, her black curls. She's so lightly armored, and he crushes her. And the story says that as Achilles killed her, as he drove his spear through her throat, their eyes met. And he saw how young she was and how lovely and how brave. And he fell in love. But he'd killed her. And of course, in killing her, he'd killed perhaps his own future happiness. And this is on a vase. Think what the wall painting must have been like. '79 AD, Vesuvius erupts, burying the Roman town of Pompeii. This is one of those instances when something happened that for those concerned was a tragedy, because they died, choking in the volcanic ash, struggling to breathe, and that's a terrible way to die. But although we may say alas and alack, for us, selfishly, it turned out a great piece of good fortune, because the dry volcanic ash that buried Pompeii preserved a Roman city almost in its entirety. Of course, it's wonderful that we have Pompeii, and I don't want to sound ungrateful, but it was only a small provincial town, and we can't really expect great art here. Like the Greeks, the Romans were also interested in realism, but they can't always quite carry it off. These figures are rather unconvincing. Here, however, is a portrait of an unknown couple which really shows Pompeii's art at its best. Fortunately, the Romans had a great interest in faces, and some unknown painter came here and he painted this exceptional portrait. What we do know is that these two were married. There's just an indefinable something about them. But not all that long married, wouldn't you think? I've sometimes wondered if this isn't an expensive version of the wedding photograph. That gawky young man with his big ears. I don't think he's grown into his face yet. He has these beautiful sensual lips but that anxious forehead, and he's looking at us so apprehensively, clutching that precious scroll to his bosom. And then his elegant wife, who I think will drive the family car. She's gazing pensively into the distance with her pen at her delicately pointed chin. And that direction of the gaze, hers to the distance, his apprehensively out at us, just suggests so subtly that this is a marriage that hasn't yet come together. And because this house was still being built when the volcano erupted, the odds are it never had time to come together. They move us and interest us, and that's what makes a good portrait. And it's still more moving when we remember that for hundreds and hundreds of years we won't see something like this again. People looking at us from a wall with such dignity and vitality and intimacy. But a strange new sect, the Christians, was soon to conquer the Roman Empire and change the story of painting. In the East, there was a great reaction against the power of the image, the icon. They began to fear that pictures were idols, graven images. And so, icon painting became safeguarded and highly regimented. Icon painting has barely changed for 1,000 years. Here in the West, we went through the Dark Ages, where the rules and law of the Roman Empire were a distant memory. Christian communities like the monks on the remote Isle of Iona lived in real fear of Viking raids. But here they were also free to use their Celtic traditions to create the greatest work of art ever to come from the British Isles, the Book of Kells. If I say this is a book to die for, people probably did die for it. Hiding it, finally escaping with it. One can imagine a little boat, a coracle, and some monk sitting there with the Book of Kells clasped to his breast, one of the few survivors who had to live to take the precious book back to the Irish mainland. And even there it wasn't safe, because about 200 years later, somebody stole the book. Not, alas, for the book itself, because it was probably an illiterate thief, but for the wonderful binding and the casket it was in. And then the wretched villain threw the book into a bog where it stayed for some months until, happily, it was found. And then Cromwell's men came and it was sent to Dublin to be safe. And then the worst came, because a well-meaning restorer thought the book might look better if it was slightly smaller, and cut bits off. Here you can see this extraordinary page of St. John. The damage shows in the tragedy that this is a surreal St. John, because round the corners are sticking parts of another body, hands and feet, and up at the top, cut off by that restorer, a dastardly creature whose name I will not reveal to you, the head that would have told us who this body is. Is it God the Father embracing St. John? Embracing the world? Or was this a sort of crucifixion? Is this Christ on the cross and St. John, as it were, makes the cross in the middle? Or is it neither of those? Is it just Celtic imagination run wild? We don't know, because it's been destroyed. And things are written in the book, business transactions of the monastery, and people signed their names. It's one of the miracles that something so wonderful and precious has survived.